Hey everybody, thanks for tuning in. Welcome back to the channel. Today we're going to talk about the rebuild of my D16Y8 in my 1998 Honda Civic Ex. Let's talk first about why. So I bought the car about a month prior to this rebuild, and the car would lose probably 3 quarts of oil within 200 to 300 miles. So I would take a road trip about 150 miles away, fill it up with oil, come back, fill it up with oil. So as you can see from this video, it just leaks everywhere underneath. Now, being in the Midwest and the Rust Belt, kind of a good thing. All these bolts will be nice and easy to take off. But I can't go 100 miles losing 1 to 2 quarts of oil. So it's time to pull it out. So what I'm going to do in this video is walk you through the first process of getting it up, supported, get the engine out. I'll cut in and out with a little bit of music. I'm kind of pointing to the weep hole above the clutch there, or below the clutch there. Main culprit really is the rear main seal. It really leaks really bad on this car, and it's got about 273,000 miles on it, so it's time. Here we go. Alright, let's start by getting it up on some jack stands. I've got the car backed up as far as I can in the garage. This is important so that I can get the engine hoist in the front, still close the garage, still work comfortably. So I've got it all the way backed up, get up on some jack stands, and we'll start doing our work. Alright, now that we've got it up on stands, we're going to go ahead and drain the fluids. Start eyeballing some things in there. I'm showing you the drain plug there. I think I had something important to say. Don't remember what it was. Probably something like no metal shavings. You know, the motor runs really well. It just leaks oil really bad. So no knocks, no ticks. Everything's pretty smooth. So this engine rebuild that we're going to do in this multi-part series is really about resealing it, re-ringing it, changing some pistons, changing the bearings, getting a lot of prolonged life out of this, and replacing those seals so that the leak stops. Now, when you first do a job like this, I recommend, you see I got the fluids drained, but I'm going around and I'm spraying all the bolts that I know I'm going to take off with some liquid wrench or, you know, your favorite penetrating lube. I believe in this case it was either WD-40 or liquid wrench. I'm spraying motor mount bolts, I'm spraying all kinds of random bolts and stuff that I know that I'm going to take out. Give them time to soak. I'm showing you there I got to set up snap-on semi-deep sockets that I absolutely love. They come in super handy here, so. We're going to start by taking the air intake piping off. We're going to clear all that out of the way. We're going to start working on some harness stuff. We're going to show some of that. We'll talk a little bit more about that when we get to it. Alright, new view under the hood here. So you see I've taken the distributor out. You know, when you take a distributor out of a car, it's important to understand the positioning of it. But when you're doing a full engine rebuild, not that big of a deal because we're going to rekey it with top dead center anyway. And the Honda can only go in 1 of 2 ways the way it's keyed, so not big concern here. So I'm pulling off harness clips for temperature sensor, fan switch. Right now I'm doing the bypass hose from the cylinder head. Got some great hose pliers that help a lot with this. You can kind of see in the picture. There's big channel locks there, but the dark blue handled are hose pliers that have a really nice end on them. You can buy them Harbor Freight, Snap-on, anybody like that. So I'm starting to disconnect clips for the wire harness for all these, and I'm looking at motor mount starter, things like that that are on the side. Alright, so my original plan was to pull that harness mount off, as you can see, I'm fighting with it. So I just said forget it, I'll leave it there. And then I grabbed my snap-on roll pin, or excuse me, cotter pin tool. That's that orange handle tool you see in the picture. That thing is phenomenal. I use it for so many different uses. It's super sharp in the end, but it's super strong, so it helps with removing these like slide-on clips, harness connectors, things like that. I use that tool for everything. Probably one of the best investments I've ever made. so as I'm walking around the car looking down between the engine, the firewall, the engine, and the frame, I'm looking for different things that are in the way, things that are connected that I want to separate. You see me looking around a lot. So in the back, I pulled fuel line off, vapor canister lines, vacuum lines, the brake booster line. I'm pulling the power steering here just to get it up out of the way. I'm mounting underneath the wiper blade there off the pump. So, I really just trying to disconnect everything that's connected to the engine assembly, so when I pull this out, it's clear and free out of the way. So typically what I'll do is I'll pull the connectors from the items on the engine. And you saw a minute ago I was moving that harness looking around underneath the intake, and there's the harness for the fuel injectors wraps down and around under the intake to a mounting bracket, then comes back around. I unplugged the harness on the right hand side of the engine, as you saw me do a minute ago, and I'm kind of looking through, feeling around, going, do I really want to deal with what's under this intake? So what I'm going to end up doing, and I kind of wasted a little bit of time unplugging some of these sensors up front, but I'm going to end up taking that harness out, the engine harness, complete engine harness out from the computer, and laying it over the engine to pull it out all as one assembly, which actually works a lot better in the future. That's the only way I'll do it. So you'll see in a minute. I'm going to work underneath that battery box on the left hand side and kind of look at that harness now, following it back through. And I looked up in the all data to find out where it connected up, and I'll end up working on that. So I'm pulling some miscellaneous vacuum lines off the charcoal canister, stuff like that, but you'll see me pull that harness here shortly. So I'm going to start pulling the lower valance off the front. Gives me a better shot up on the AC compressor. And I've also got some coolant that's kind of leaking down from the radiator drain valve that I want to get under control a little bit. So we're starting to get that cleaned up, get that removed, work on the underside of the car a little bit. Alright, so I'm going to go ahead and pull the power steering pump up and out, and I'm putting the hardware back in the pump. That way I don't lose anything I set up on a shelf. I try to, as I remove items, keep the hardware with it and then set them off in a systematic approach. Depending on the job that I'm doing, I may put them in a line of which they came out so that I know which direction to go backwards through. I did that with a Volkswagen Dash about a year ago. We did heater core in an old Jetta. That was a lot of fun. Anyways, so I try to stay as organized as I can with these things. And I'm down here working on I think either the belts or the AC compressor. I think I'm pulling the AC compressor 4 bolts out so I can lay it over without discharging the AC system. Alright, I'm going to start working on pulling the driver's side ball joint loose. My plan here, I'm not taking the brake assemblies off, I'm not removing the axle from the driver's, or from the outbound side. I'm going to drop the control arms, basically I'm going to release the ball joints, drop the control arms, slack the suspension and pull the axles out from the transmission side and just hang them. It's a lot easier this way, I don't have to disassemble the entire front spindles. It's just a much easier approach. What I'm doing now is something that most Honda owners that work on Hondas really hate. So there's a roll pin that holds the linkage on the D-Series motors to the transmission from the shifter. So that roll pin is a real bear to get out sometimes. So the right size roll pin punch will get the job done and a lot of force, but it is not a fun thing to take out. So we ended up getting it out. It worked out, but anybody who works on Hondas will tell you that's not a fun one. Alright, so like we talked about earlier, I'm going over it, I'm taking this battery tray out. Underneath the battery tray is where the main harness routes through the firewall. So I'm taking that battery tray out so I can pull the 2 nuts off of that harness hole at the firewall where it seals up and fish that out. So I've been battling through that, and you see I'm using a wrench for some leverage on my ratchet. I don't want to break that bolt, but I want to get it out for sure. So let it cool down a little, grab my bar, crank it out. That's the bar for my jack. Sometimes you gotta get a little creative. Let's see here. So I eventually get that bolt out. Pull the little tray up here. Just a second. There it is. And there's that nasty bolt that came out of that bad boy. Alright. So now we're looking down here where the harness routes through. I got 2 nuts right there at the firewall. I'm going to take the main powers for the harness, the main engine harness, off of the distribution block there. I'm going to take those two nuts out, and I'm going to route that harness up and over the top of the engine. Alright, so I'm taking off the slave cylinder flex line right at the hard line and bracket. A little easier, I can leave that hard line and the slave cylinder on the car and worry about bending it when it comes out. So take that up, flip it up out of the way, and then continue on with the process. Alright, so on the right side here, I'm going to kind of show you what I did on the left side with just a little bit closer up look. So, got the wheel cranked all the way to the right. I'm going to take the lower pinch bolt out from the strut where it holds against the control arm. I've taken the nut off of the lower ball joint, excuse me. And then what you want to do with your hammer, you put some downward force, but you want to hit what the ball joint goes through from the side, and that typically will cause it to pop out without doing any damage to boots and to the ends of ball joints. Now Honda makes a tool for this to pop them out when they're stubborn. I didn't need it, but it worked pretty good just with hitting it from the side. And then I'm going to work on the transmission side, like once again, just like the driver's side. I didn't disconnect the outbound side of this CV axle, so I'm just prying the inbound side out of the transmission and get it up out of the way. You can see in the background that linkage for the shifter, so the solid bar and then the U-joint with that roll pin. That's a real bear, so we're going to keep working on getting this out. Alright, so engine's almost ready to come out. What we want to do now is support the engine before we take our motor mounts out. So I've got the adjustable, the weight adjustable bracket on here that allows me to pivot the weight from one side to the other to keep the engine coming straight up and out. I'm attached on the cylinder head on the driver's side and on the tranny on the passenger side. I added a little bit of tension, and then I'll start working on the motor mount bolts. Alright, now she's ready to come out, so we're going to slowly lift it up. We're going to look for clearance issues, things in the front. Kind of, you see here the exhaust manifolds kind of hitting the AC lines. Check a couple other things. We want to look for anything that's hitting, impacting, things we forgot to disconnect before we raise it up and out. So that's what I'm doing right now. I'm going around, I'm looking, trying to find points of tension. You don't want to force it out. It should come out pretty smooth. So I'm balancing the weight distribution. Let's see here. Just double checking everything's clear. I don't want to damage or break anything. Looks like I'm taking the bracket out for that motor mount on that side because I just didn't have quite enough clearance to clear it out and out. So pull that out of the way, set that down on the shelf, check everything else. Looks like I've got to get a bolt out there. I had to lower back down to get a bolt out.
Hold me close till I get up. Time is barely on our side. I don't wanna waste what's left. The storms we chase are leading us, and love is all we'll ever trust. Yeah, no, I don't wanna waste what's left. And on we'll go, through the wastelands, through the highways, till my shadow turns to sun rays. And on we'll go, through the wastelands, through the highways. And on we'll
Alright, I was having some issues with that rear motor mount bracket, so I'm going to go ahead and take that off from underneath, and then we should be good to get this thing pulled up and out.
and we'll grow in number, fueled by them to see the horizon, turn us to thousands. And on we'll go, through the wastelands, through the highways, till my shadow turns to sun rays. And on we'll go, through the wastelands, through the highways. And on we'll go.
Alright, up and out she comes. So we're going to slide her forward, get that thing clear. We'll set her down and we'll get ready for part 2 where we start tearing her down.
Hi! I hope you enjoyed the video. Please subscribe and like the video down here. And to watch another video, click over here. Thank you, and bye.